Autumn is here, and I can feel things starting to slow down. At this time of year, I love to head to my kitchen, light a candle, and bake something delicious. There is something so satisfying about making something with my own hands, appreciating what I have, and enjoying what I make with my family. Spending time in the kitchen making nutritious food for the people I love is not a waste of time. It's precious time spent carefully, nourishing them, body and soul. So why don't you spend the next few minutes with me while I bake up some autumn goodies for my family? Taking care of a large family can sometimes feel like a burden. Sometimes I don't want to be in the kitchen. Sometimes I'd rather be doing something else than baking bread. But for our family especially, with the food allergies and other health problems we're dealing with, this time spent cooking and baking is essential. There have been times in my life when I felt resentful for the time that I spend in the kitchen. But I came to the realization several years ago that if I was going to be spending this much time cooking and baking, I needed to start enjoying it. So now I light a candle. Now I decorate my kitchen. Now I experiment with new recipes and push myself to try more difficult things. And I've come to really enjoy being here. And I especially enjoy the smiles around the table when I place something in front of my children that they're going to really enjoy. Now that's all done and my flour has stopped milling, I can explain to you what I'm up to today. I want to get some things baked for the week so I don't have to worry about having bread on hand and snacks for the kids. I've just put together the dough for 2 loaves of freshly milled flour sourdough Artisan loaf, which is a recipe that has gone live on the blog just this week. So if you're interested in getting that recipe and all of the different tips that I have to make it succeed, head over to the blog and you can find it there. The other 2 loaves that I'm making are some freshly milled flour fruit loaf. So it's the same base as the Artisan loaf, but I'm adding some dried apricots, dates and walnuts. It's a really delicious loaf and it's perfect for autumn. We love to have it in the morning with some salted butter on there. It's just delicious. So I really recommend you try that recipe, and that will be coming out on the blog next week. And finally, I'm going to be making some hamburger buns because on Wednesday we're going to have burgers with a friend that's coming over for dinner. So I'm getting those made today and they will be nice and fresh for tomorrow. And later on this afternoon, I'm going to be making some cakes, so that we've got some things for snacks for the children, and I'm going to be experimenting with a cinnamon swirl cake. I'm not sure how it's going to go. In my head it sounds amazing, but we'll see how it turns out. And the other thing that I want to make is some chocolate courgette muffins or zucchini muffins. I've got a huge courgette left over in the fridge and I need to use it up, so I'm going to grate that up and pop that in the muffins, and hopefully the kids won't even know that it's there. So I've just done the first stretch and folds on these breads, and I'm realising that the wheat that I just bought that arrived yesterday doesn't seem to be as strong as the wheat that I've been using previously, even though I bought it from the same place. So I think that the shop that I bought it from must have changed their supplier, and I could tell when I received the wheat that it was lighter and bigger grains. So I think that it's a different variety, or maybe it's because it's summer wheat and not winter wheat that's different. But in any case, when I was doing these stretch and folds, the dough was incredibly sticky, falling apart, and I really don't know if these are going to turn out, so we'll have to see later on. I hope they do. Okay, let's try this second stretch and fold and see if it's any better. Looking slightly better. Still very sticky. This is the sandwich loaf for the hamburger buns. This dough is for the 2 whole wheat loaves. It's coming together better. It's still not great. Seems very wet. Need to give it some more time. And this is for the fruit loaf, so it's the same recipe as the whole wheat loaf. I'm going to have to let this come together for a little bit longer before I add the fruit and nuts. But it's looking better already. Now that I've done a couple more stretch and folds on my different doughs, I'm getting the inclusions ready for my fruit and nut loaf. So I'm going to be roasting some walnuts and chopping up some apricots and dates. Now it's up to you really if you like big or small chunks of nuts and fruit in your loaf. I've done it both ways. When they're larger, I think it's tastier, but when they're smaller, it has less of a tendency to burn on the crust, so it's really up to you. You can do it either way. Usually I laminate the bread when I'm adding inclusions, but because the dough was so sticky and so difficult to work with this day, I decided that I was going to add it in the last stretch and fold. So it would have been better probably if I'd added the inclusions a little bit earlier on in the process so that they were better distributed, but it did work really well. I always weigh my grains before I mill them. I find it's a lot easier to do it this way. I mill exactly the right amount that I need for a recipe, and that way I don't have any waste. And it also makes it possible for me to be adding ingredients to the flour as it's milling, and I save a bit of time this way, which is great for me because I'm always racing after the clock. So anything that is measured with volume, I can add straight to the bowl. But if it's measured with weight, obviously I have to wait until the mill has finished so that I can put the bowl on the scales and weigh the other ingredients in. I'm using my basic muffin recipe as a base for this cake. The only difference is that instead of baking it up in a muffin tin, I'm going to be pouring it into a 9x13 dish. So in this bowl, I've got 200 grams of whole wheat flour, 100 grams of sourdough discard, a teaspoon and a half of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, 120 milliliters of oil, 200 grams of honey, some vanilla essence, and 2 eggs. This batter mixes together really easily, so it's a great recipe to make if you're in a bit of a rush. You can pop it in the fridge at this point and leave it to ferment overnight, but I decided to use it straight away. So for the cinnamon swirl part, I'm measuring out 100 grams of brown sugar and 3 teaspoons of cinnamon. Now, this was far too much for the cake that I was making, so I put the extra in a little jam jar and I've got it ready for the next time. It's important to really butter your dish very well, especially if you're using ceramic like I am here. Then you can pour half of the batter in the bottom, sprinkle over the cinnamon and sugar mixture, and pour the other half over the top. I think I used about 1/3 or 1/2 of that cinnamon sugar mixture, and I'm pouring the other half of the batter over the top, but as you can see there wasn't quite enough. So I think the next time I make this cake I will either use a smaller dish, like a square dish, or I will make more batter. To be honest, it didn't really matter that the top layer of batter didn't cover the brown sugar. It just meant that some of the sugar became really nicely caramelized on the top. So now I'm taking a skewer and I'm making random swirl shapes just to get the sugar and the cinnamon going through the batter all the way. I baked this in the oven at 180 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes. You always need to check with a skewer or a knife that your cake is cooked all the way through, and you'll be able to tell when the knife comes out clean. Now I'm on to making these chocolate zucchini muffins, or courgette muffins as I would say. These were incredibly tasty. I used Farmhouse on Boone's recipe for this, but of course I tweaked it a little bit because I didn't have all of the ingredients. I'll link the original recipe in the description box below. I swapped out spelt flour for einkorn flour. I skipped the baking soda and added an extra bit of baking powder. I used olive oil instead of coconut oil, and honey and maple syrup mixed together instead of coconut sugar. I also left out the orange juice and the zest of the orange, and I used yogurt instead of buttermilk. It's funny because every time I suggested to my children that I would make some courgette bread or courgette muffins, they turned their nose up at it completely. They did not want to try it. So I didn't tell them anything about these muffins. And they tried them and they absolutely loved them. It was quite incredible. They were very good, I have to say. I had a couple. They were delicious. In fact, I almost didn't have any to photograph because they were going so fast when the children came home from school. Now, I know that this looks like cheese, but I promise you it is courgette. It's a big yellow courgette that I got really cheap from our local organic shop. And I just had a little bit left over, so I grated that up and popped it in there. Again, this batter mixes together really easily, so it's a very quick recipe to make. I like to scoop out my muffin mixture into this muffin tin with a large ice cream scoop. It just makes it really easy. And I bake these in the oven for about 20 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius. Now we're back to my bread, and it doesn't seem to be quite as disastrous as I thought. It was very sticky to shape, and it probably would have been a good idea to put some flour on the work surface. I usually just dampen the work surface when I'm making and shaping bread, but I think in this particular occasion it would have been better floured. So I did my best. I tried to shape it as best I could. I managed to get these 2 loaves into the Bannerton baskets without too much difficulty, but I can just tell that it's not going to rise as my bread normally would rise. This is what I love about cooking and baking, is that you're always learning. I thought I had this recipe down. I thought I would never make bad bread again. Little did I know that with a change of wheat supply, I would have to rethink my whole recipe. I think I've got it now. With this particular wheat, I bring the volume of water down to 370 mils, and that seems to work much better. So I just want to encourage those of you that are new to cooking, new to baking. Disasters sometimes happen, but you always learn something from it, and that's what's really interesting about cooking and baking and homemaking. It can be as boring or as interesting as you like. You really make your own job as a homemaker. And I love testing things out and seeing what works, making adjustments and trying to get better. I stitched these loaves as best I could and didn't really imagine that I would get a very good loaf of bread out of this dough. But you'll see later on in the video that it turned out really not too badly at all. Now I'm on to shaping the hamburger buns, and I did think I'd have even more trouble shaping these. But I kept my hands really wet and managed to get the little balls of dough just the right size and about the right shape. They were not the most uniform of hamburger buns that I've ever seen, but they were the right size for our burgers, and they were very delicious actually. I really like Farmhouse on Boone's sourdough bread for whole wheat flour, freshly milled flour. I think it turns out really well every time, so I'll link that in the description box below for you too. I wanted to get these hamburger buns baked tonight, so instead of putting them in the fridge to cold ferment, I'm shaping them immediately, and I'm going to put them on a heat mat. It's a plant seed heat mat that I use, and it's a really good idea if you're a little bit short of time and you want to get your bread rising quickly. So I popped it on there for a good hour and let them become nice and puffy before I baked them in the oven. And I'm just going to do a little bit of egg wash and a few sesame seeds on the top for decoration. This cinnamon swirl cake was a hit, very tasty. The only change that I would make would be baking it in a smaller dish. And these chocolate zucchini muffins, what can I say? They were amazing.
These are really good.
So while I'm getting these loaves of bread scored and baked, I just wanted to say thank you, friends. Thank you for being here. Thank you for following along. And would you consider leaving me a comment below to let me know what you're baking this autumn in your kitchen? Maybe we can share ideas with each other. As you can see, I like to open bake my sourdough so I can bake several loaves at once. But sourdough does need quite a lot of steam, and I create this steam by heating up a pan in the bottom of the oven and pouring boiling water into it. This gives a load of steam right at the beginning of the bake, and then I'll remove the pan after about 20 minutes so that the bread can crisp up nicely. And I like the crust that this gives to my artisan sourdough loaves. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, would you consider subscribing to my channel? I make videos every week on homemade food from scratch, allergy-friendly meal ideas, and plenty of sourdough. I'll see you next time. Bye!